with their family, and welcome back. We are going to call the commission to order. And Secretary Burgess, do you have any changes to the agenda today?
Good morning. There are several changes to the agenda this morning. The following two items are over. Item 201, case 12M0476, the proceeding to assess the residential and small non-residential retail energy markets. The petitions for rehearing and clarification is over. Item 374, which is case 13E0030, which is the Con Edison Storm Hardening and Resiliency Collaborative. The Phase 2 report is also over. Two items have been pulled from the agenda. One case from item 161, which is the enforcement proceedings for alleged violations of 16 NYCRR Part 753, the protection of underground facilities. One case is 14G0536, the Castor Drilling Enterprises, National Fuel Gas Distribution Corporation. All other cases remain on for that item. And two cases have been pulled from item 661, which is the renewals of cable television franchises. One is 14V0444, which is Charter Communications, the town of Austerlitz, Columbia County. And the second is 14V0445, the Cablevision of Rockland Ramapo, Village of Tuxedo Park, Orange County. All other items remain on for that section. Moved to the regular agenda is item 373, case 14E0422, the clarification of process for utilities to seek relief from net metering caps is being moved to the regular agenda and has been renumbered item 301. And finally, is a correction to item 202, case 14M0565. The title should read, in the matter of the examination of programs to address energy affordability for low-income utility customers. And that's all the changes to the agenda.
Great. Thank you. Before we begin the meeting, I want to note we have a special guest with us today, Max Berman, who is Commissioner Berman's son. And the nice thing is that he's asked his mother to behave herself so that she doesn't embarrass him. So we'll embarrass him for her. And also want to note that I'm really pleased to recognize that Tom Condon, who has now officially joined as a senior member of our staff. And among other things, Tom will be helping us with REV and our other initiatives, and more to come on that, but welcome, Tom. So with that, let's begin. The first item we're talking about on the regular agenda is item 202. And that, again, is our examination of programs to address energy affordability for low-income utility customers. I just want to, before you begin, Michael's going to be presenting this, Michael Corso, and Marty and Sonia are going to be talking about this item today. But just to lay a little bit of groundwork, at the end of last year, I asked Michael, who's now acting director of the Consumer Services, and his team to really start looking at where we are with regard to low-income consumers. There's obviously, especially now, cold day, prices are up. There's always a concern that this commission has around the effect on electricity and energy prices on particularly low-income consumers, and has been brought to our attention by several of the low-income advocates over the course of last year. We're seeing a disturbing trend upwards concerning both arrearages and disconnects. And that I wanted to make sure that before this new winter and new year is upon us, that we actually start looking at this issue and start to think about what are we doing? Are we doing the best things we can be doing, et cetera, et cetera. So before even beginning that, I asked staff to sort of take a look at the whole nature of the issue and to come up with some recommendations on what we might want to proceed. So I wanted to note before we begin my appreciation, I think I handed this to them probably several days before the beginning of the Christmas holidays, but really asked them to sort of let's get going on it. So thank you to Michael and to Marty and patience of my fellow commissioners, because this was something we did rather rapidly in looking at it, but I think it's the right thing to do. So I'll let you, Michael, introduce our thoughts on, or your staff's thoughts on how we should proceed.
Thank you, Chair Zibelman and Commissioners. Good morning. Item 202 is a recommendation from staff to institute a proceeding to examine the energy affordability programs which affect low-income customers across the utilities in New York. We think it's an important proceeding in light of the things that you just teed up, Chair Zibelman, and in light of some of the trends and issues that we've observed. First, I want to note that we believe our research is accurate that in 1988, the first energy low-income program was born, but actually 2 utilities did it in the same year. We're not sure which one was first, but it's immaterial, except to say that in Brooklyn Union Gas, the on-track program was created, and in Niagara Mohawk, the low-income customer assistance program, LICAP, was started over 25 years ago. If we used that as an indicator, we might have 20 years later been able to predict that those 2 companies would merge. With that in mind, the utility programs had a lot of controversy for low-income programs back in the day, and a number of debates and discussions occurred. But what was learned that the programs had value, and the cases produced small but effective, we think, low-income programs that grew over time, and each utility who came in for rates post that time all eventually formed low-income programs. The programs have been around for more than 20 years, and they've evolved similarly in the kinds of things that the programs afford, such as discounts, arrears forgiveness, energy education, and the ability to have waivers for reconnect charges when a customer is disconnected. The import of this item is to help us review these programs through the efforts of the advice we received from consumer advocacy organizations such as UIU, AARP, PULP, Consumers Union, NYPIRG, and I know I'm leaving somebody out, which I don't want to do, and the Association of Energy Affordability and the City of New York, who have participated with us in some meetings over the last couple of months to determine some of the issues they care about and have brought to our attention over the years, and now we focus those to allow us to focus this proceeding so that we can assist in making consistent programs across the state, because they're not just yet. And the benefit of that will be to be consistent with state and commission policy, and in addition, perhaps not have such litigation on all these issues in every rate case before the commission. The hope is that will expedite good treatment of better treatment of these programs, hopefully affecting these customers in a positive way, and in addition, have resources more available for the consumer advocate organizations and staff and the rest of the parties in not litigating these issues so much in the rate cases, but to have a standard approach to affect those programs going forward. We recognize there are a number of rate proceedings coming into New York soon, and we expect that this case will help us provide guidance to those cases to help perhaps limit the need to litigate. A trend that the chair asked us to look at, and I wanted to report with regard to arrears, is that in 2012, there were 922,000 customers, $640 million in arrears. In 2013, that number grew to 980,000 customers and $680 million. And in 14, we had 1.1 million customers, more than $756 million in arrears. That trend is up. We recognize that is something we need to recognize and figure out best ways to address. So the examination of these programs, we expect, will help us look at best practices, determine best approaches to assure that the effectiveness of these programs are strong and helping customers and also helping reduce cost for the utilities to continue keeping customers on the system and connected to their essential energy service.
What we've been talking about this morning, and Chair Zibelman and Michael both touched on this in their comments, is maintaining access to essential utility services for the state's most vulnerable customers. And there are actually three different kinds of strategies that the Commission has at its disposal. One is a set of very strong consumer protections against termination of service, which is found in HEFPA and the Commission's rules. Those consumer protections are important for all customers, but they're especially important for low-income customers that are vulnerable to termination. We have programs that create opportunities for low-income households to benefit from the cost savings offered by energy efficiency and distributed energy resource programs. And then we have direct financial assistance programs. So just to provide some context, what this case we'll be looking at is the third type, that third category of program. All three are important, but this proceeding will focus on the latter. There are various different utility rate affordability programs today. They provide a wide range of different benefits. Michael touched on some of those. Over time, since 1988, when those first programs were put into place, some of those early cases, there was a lot of discussion, a lot of argument about whether utilities should implement this type of program at all. And I think over time that through individual rate cases that has been answered in the affirmative. So all the utilities today have these programs. Really the question today is, how do we achieve the goal that these programs are trying to meet most effectively and at minimum cost? The main goal of this proceeding will be a thorough examination of these programs, identify the best practices, the opportunities that we might have to standardize these programs to reflect those best practices, to ensure that they maintain consistency with the Commission's policies and objectives going forward, and ideally to develop the criteria that we would use to evaluate their effectiveness to ensure that they maintain service for low-income households while efficiently using limited ratepayer funds. Another goal will be to ease the administrative burden. As Michael mentioned, a majority of the utilities will have rate cases pending before the Commission in 2015. And if we had a more consistent approach to providing these programs, we could reduce the time spent by the Commission, the staff, and all the parties litigating these issues in each and every rate case. Michael.
I just want to, in closing, just comment that point that Marty just made, the administrative ease that we may be able to create by creating consistency and uniform programs, will also help the consumer advocacy organizations assist us in designing important thinking about how to serve these particular customers in light of REV and clean energy, so that we can assure ourselves that we're addressing all the sectors to the best of our ability and not to leave out by any stretch the low-income community. And with that, that completes our presentation, and we are available to answer any questions.
Sure. So, thank you. Thank you very much. I think that for me, the key here is that the fact that we do have a responsibility to make certain that electric prices are just and reasonable. And we recognize that the burden on low income would mean that, while in some instances a particular rate for a higher income individual may appear reasonable, for lower income people it could be unreasonable because of other expenses, other costs and income levels, and that the Commission has had a history of looking at these issues and making sure that we have practices in place that address affordability for all income strata and then tries to do some in a just and reasonable way. I think that the idea, as we've explored in other areas such as the usage of scorecards for emergency and for safety, and the uses of best practice transfer and other aspects of our business, makes it clear that when we shine a light on an issue and we take a look at how we're doing and how we're measuring effectiveness, excuse me, it gives us an opportunity to see, are we doing everything in the right way that we want to do, and are we achieving what we want to do out of a program? I think the other issue that, Michael, you've brought up is important to me, is that we have a number of rate cases, sorry, it's a residual cold, that we are expecting over the course of the year. And anything we can do to provide guidance, and if we can do this in an expedited fashion, I'm hoping we can. And I am appreciative of the fact that the staff has been working with members of the community who are most interested in these issues. And this is one area, the standardization, that they thought would be of great help. So I think it is worthwhile for us to explore it and see what we can do in that regard. We're, like in any proceeding, we're open-minded. We're starting with this with an idea of let's see how well we're doing, let's see how much better we can do, and then let's move forward in as expeditious fashion as we can. I'm hopeful that people will get engaged. This is not going to be, I think, we want to be very focused about this. This is not this is not to duplicate other efforts. Obviously, in the REV docket, in the clean energy docket, in the examination that we're doing in the multiple interveners proceeding, we're looking at similar type issues but those issues are largely focused on how do we reduce the costs of energy, how do we make it more efficient, how do we deliver energy efficiency services better. This is very, very focused on the discounts on rates, the arrearages issues, the other programs we put in place to make sure that people can continue to have service. So, and I look forward to, frankly, a good dialogue with the various parties and a good set of recommendations from staff on how best the Commission can proceed. So with that, I would intend to vote this forward. Any other comments?
Michael and Marty, you've covered all the bases. We've always prided ourselves in making sure that affordability and access and making sure people are helped when they need help. And I think it's not a bad idea to go back and sharpen our pencils. We've always learned that we sometimes don't get everything exactly right because times change and things change. So I think this is a perfect time with the REV proceeding going on to really update and look at, which I think are the most and two important words that you used was standardization and also consistency. So I thank you and look forward to working along with you to make sure, again, New York leads the way, as we have in the past, to make sure our residential and low-income customers get the best bang for their buck. So appreciate your efforts on all of this and look forward to what we do as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Berman?
Thank you. I do think it is good that in the anniversary of the polar vortex, we're talking about energy affordability. I do have a couple of questions that will help formulate my thoughts fuller. Marty, you talked about the 3 buckets, and you also talked about the main goal for this proceeding. Could you just clarify and maybe restate what you said on those 3 buckets and the main goal?
Sure.
And it's okay if you have to look at your notes.
No, that's good. Right. I talked about the main goal being to try to maintain service for vulnerable households. In developing low-income programs over the last couple of decades, we've learned a lot about what works and what doesn't work, and I think this is a great opportunity to focus on those lessons learned. I did want to make an effort to try and focus our efforts in this proceeding on the rate discount programs to try to separate those, sort of tease out those issues to say, really, energy efficiency and distributed energy resources, consumer protections, these are critical policies for the Commission, but they're not really the focus of this proceeding. We really need to focus on the rate discount piece and making sure that the rate discount programs that we have in place function the way that we intend them to.
Okay, and how does doing that outside of the rate case help?
Well, I think as Commissioner Akampora mentioned, one thing that we have difficulty achieving within the rate case context is standardization, is consistency. All these programs differ in the types of services that are offered. To some extent, they differ also in their eligibility requirements, in their scope, by which I mean the number of different types of interventions or benefits that are offered. And so we really think this is an opportunity to take a closer look at that and say, what works, what has worked, what has perhaps not worked as well, and what combinations of interventions or benefits might be the most effective. So those are difficult questions to answer within the context of an individual utility rate case, where in most cases we're looking at what the utility has done in the past and what they might do going forward in the future.
And by looking at it in the rate case, how would that be helpful? You're saying not being helpful in the rate case, but has it been harmful when we've looked at it?
Well, the difficulty in the rate case context is achieving consistency. I could certainly think of characteristics that might be easier to address in a rate case context. I think
Such as?
Well, I think to some extent each utility service territory does have certain differences in terms of the customer population that it serves. How many of its low-income customers are heating customers, for example, as opposed to non-heating customers? How many are eligible for or apply for and receive HEAP benefits that are paid to the utility? So there are individual differences that we shouldn't forget about. But there is an opportunity for greater consistency. We've always looked at them within individual utility rate cases, so I think the individual utility contexts have been well addressed. What we haven't addressed so well, perhaps, is the consistency and the standardization.
Yeah, and I'd like to just add the obvious, which is the best practices benefit, which is we can learn from each of those utility programs where the best approaches are and hopefully have those transform into a standard approach at each utility.
So are you saying that you haven't taken from one rate case to another some of the lessons learned in an overall capacity and applied it and then looked at it if it might be applicable in that particular rate case?
No, of course we have done that, but we have not examined it in a holistic way, and we haven't done that with the parties directly in a more generic way. And I think the benefit of that is to get the inclusion and the thinking of the consumer advocates who spend their life energy on helping to determine the best programs, along with the utilities who have a lot of stake in this, because the utilities over time have developed a real understanding of how beneficial these programs are to their customers and how keeping those customers on the system is a lower cost way of effectuating how the system works best. So we're just thinking this approach will be better in developing best practices outside of the rate case, so we're not bogged down with the specific rate case issues.
Thank you. So, and I do have some more questions. When I look at this, my initial reaction is, are we actually going to be addressing this in a better way by moving this to a generic proceeding and now coming up with some alleged standardization and best practices? And has there been a problem that over these past 25 years we have not addressed? And if so, what are those specific problems that have caused us to do harm to low-income customers? Because this is the first that I'm hearing about it through this proceeding.
Well, let me answer that question. I think that the evidence that we're seeing, and that's what I'm concerned about. We're seeing increases in disconnect. We're seeing increases in arrearages. We have a recognition across the state that questions of affordability in general are a problem. We want New York to be one of the best states when it comes to the value of the energy dollar. There's a certain matter of things that we can do, and we're going to do everything we can do in this state to drive efficiency of the system, to drive down the cost of energy, to make sure that the markets for energy are both economically and environmentally sustainable. But I think we would be naive to think that you can create markets and solutions for the broad populace and not take care of the effects of low income in an efficient way. Every time I've seen in my political or in my business life, the ability to shine a light on a problem and focus on it and step back and do an evaluation saying, are we being as effective as we can be? Are we doing the right thing? Are we looking out beyond our own borders and seeing what other people are doing and making sure that for New Yorkers, we can look ourselves in the mirror and say, hey, we're doing our jobs, we're taking some leadership, we're shining a light on a problem, we're evaluating it. I don't know, and I don't know if we could say that we've always done as well as we can do. We thought we did. But the purpose of proceedings and the perfect, I think, for this commission, and certainly from my perspective, what this agency should be about, is identifying what we might see as some of the Achilles heels in the service that we deliver and making sure we're doing the best thing. So I don't think it's a fair question to say, well, have we been bad in the past? I think what we have is indices of problems that may be emerging and an opportunity to step back and look at it. We also have a request by the people who are involved in this day in and day out serving this population, say, make it a little easier for us. If we can have a consistent approach, maybe then we could be more successful. So I think it's worth the inquiry. It's what we're here to do. And and so in my mind, I don't think we need to. I've spent a lot of time debating, should we ask ourselves the question? The issue is we need to ask the question and we need to find the right types of answers. If we decide ultimately that what we're doing is perfectly fine, then all we've done is spent some time, but maybe then we've at least resolved that we have taken a look at this particular population and made sure that we're delivering the right types of services that we want to deliver to them. So that's, to me, I don't think we should make it any broader than that, or even a suggestion that what we've done in the past is wrong. It's just as an opportunity to do like everything else we always do, is try to find a way to make it better.
Thank you. So I think the question is it fair for me to ask, why are we starting this generic proceeding? And when I drill down, I take very seriously, as all my fellow commissioners do, the regulatory role that we have. And I also take very seriously that starting a generic proceeding can be comprehensive and it can also be cumbersome. And there are many, many different things. We follow many proceedings and we're in the mix of it. But there are also many, many proceedings that people cannot follow. You mentioned, Michael, that the reason this was brought forward was because of several meetings that staff had with the low-income advocates. Okay. I haven't had any meetings. I haven't seen anything to indicate through the filings that there's been a request for a generic proceeding. I understand that we're trying to address someone's request for a generic proceeding. So my question is, when I look through this, is undertaking a proceeding should be looked at and evaluated on what are the pros and cons and what are we ultimately trying to do, and looking at what other proceedings are out there that may also be relevant to this. I know we have a footnote in the order that references the REV proceeding as well as, I believe, the ESCO proceeding, and that those will continue. So what I need to understand is, what are we taking on by this generic proceeding? Now, I do believe that high energy costs in New York State are a key impediment to the state's economic growth. My focus has been and does remain on looking at ways to ease the high energy bills on our families and our businesses that they shoulder. We must truly ensure we're proper stewards of ratepayer funds and that there is proper oversight and accountability. When I look at this, I want to make sure that we are properly putting in place what we have started, not just at this commission, but in general in New York, and create an environment that is attracting new investment, is maintaining a diverse fuel supply, looking at ways to ensure appropriate transmission upgrades if necessary, increase long-term planning, greater coordination between electric and gas industries, appropriate price signals for pipeline infrastructure, need for flexible generation and long-term planning as renewables are built out, while avoiding harmful or ill-conceived policies, however well-intentioned. In doing so, I do believe that we will show New York as a good and safe place to live and do business as we create and sustain jobs and help ensure more affordable and reliable electricity for all. I am very, very supportive of making sure that we do what we need to for the customers, low income as well as others. So what I'm trying to gather is, when we look at the rate cases, what are the things in the rate cases that we're saying, you know what, it's time to do a timeout and look to see what we can move away from the rate case to give some guidance. I understand staff is saying that it's low income. I'm open to that. What I'm trying to understand is, what are the pros and cons for having a statewide best practices that, you know, is being done outside of the rate case. Now, I found, just from Googling last night, a 2006 study that was done by appriseinc.org. I have no idea if this is valid or not, but I did look, and it did give me some understanding of the pros and cons for doing a statewide versus utility service territory-wide program, and talked about doing this on a national level. So obviously these are issues that, when we look at, that we do need to discuss. There are pros and cons, and it goes through a whole list of them. So what have we been doing in New York on the rate cases? And maybe we need to identify the specifics of that. So what I'm trying to pull out from you is, obviously you heard from folks and you listened, but what was the analysis and the research that made you say, okay, this is going to help an administrative burden? Explain that to me.
So, Commissioner Berman, if I may respond to your questions, having both been litigation counsel for the department as well as an administrative law judge and participating in numerous rate cases, I can give you a response with respect to the pros and cons. The pros of taking this issue outside of the context of a rate case is many, one of which is the resources that go into litigating and developing these issues in the context of a rate case. Rate cases are really creatures of statute. They are very specific, the time frames, the structure of gathering information, of interacting with parties, of meeting deadlines for the submission of both initial and reply testimony, as well as the participation in litigation. Sometimes it is difficult to truly litigate in an evidentiary capacity, a policy issue such as a low-income discount program. This has been an issue that is never really traditionally fit within what I would call a true litigation context, but we put it there because it has a revenue requirement effect. And so one of the pros in pulling this out and trying to report back, which I think the time frame is in like a 90-day manner, is to take a break from the rigorous pace and the strictures of a rate case and evaluate an issue that is truly policy, although rate impactive. So I think that is a pro, and having lived it firsthand in many capacities, I can personally attest to that without having been in any of the meetings with the advocates. The second is that we have advocacy groups who have to deal with, let's say right now you have Central Hudson that's filed, Orange and Rockland is in before the commission, Con Edison is expected to file in January, NYSEG and RG&E are expected to file thereafter. You will have 5 overlapping rate cases where you have advocacy groups who have maybe one individual who has to cover each of those rate cases, and evidenced by the appendix to the order before you, they're all different programs. So to not only understand the mechanics of the program, to get in depth as to the pushes and pulls in a rate case for 5 different rate cases, and to be one individual, I'm sure Mr. Norlander would love to have a standardization of approach in his representation of pulp, because we often hear from advocates like pulp that it's very difficult for them to chase rate case after rate case and try to be an effective low-income advocate. Con is that we have a lot of work on our plate for everybody in the department. There's an ambitious agenda before the commission, but I think that the pros significantly outweigh the cons. And to your other point about, well, why aren't we doing this for other rate case elements? I hope, as a general counsel who has a team of attorneys who have to litigate rate cases after rate cases, that we are able to come back in the future and give you other elements that should have the same kind of review, whether it's the business incentive rate. But here's one where really it looks like a policy, it walks like a policy, but it has rate implications. Let's take the shot at getting a good look at this outside of the strictures of a rate case. Let's see if we can develop best practices. So as a judge, I don't have to ask over and over of staff, well, why do we do it this way here but not this way over in this case? And let's try to be mindful of the stewardship. I concur with you completely. The stewardship of ratepayer funds is critical, and I think that the best way to respond and to be responsive to that stewardship is to do this, to take it outside of the strictures of a rate case.
Let me just add on that, and then I'm going to call for a vote. I think that the reason I want to do this is that as an evidence of leadership is the role of the Commission to set policy and guidelines. It's hard to do that in an individual rate case because you have multiple issues, and many times these are presented to us as complex settlements where if we were to change one element, it would change other elements. This gives us an opportunity as a commission to show leadership and guidance and provide guidance both to the parties and the staff. So as far as I'm concerned, as chair of the commission and as head of the DPS, this is a good use of staff time. That's certainly within my discretion, and so I'm going to call a vote.
Before you call for a vote, I'd like to ask for your continued allowing me to question, because I am trying to facilitate my understanding before I vote on this item. So it would be helpful to me to be able to pull out exactly what we're doing, and it's without all of that information, I'm not able to make a determination on my vote. And I would ask that you allow me the opportunity to question staff and to also delve down into some of my concerns.
Commissioner Berman, if your concern is whether this is a use of staff time, that is within my discretion.
So
if
you
are
believe that my being able to make a decision on my vote with all of the facts and information, it's not appropriate for me to ask questions at an open forum?
What I believe is that if your questions are about what is the scope of the proceeding, and you want to understand what the scope of the proceeding is, that's fine.
Okay, then I'll stick to that. So let me just clarify. What is exactly my realm that I'm allowed to continue in? I'm allowed to ask on scope of the proceeding?
I'm saying that if your concern is, and the information you want to get is about the scope of the proceeding, I think that is certainly fine. If your concerns are about the use of staff time, I'm going to tell you that that's certainly within my discretion, and it has been my election that it is as a good use of staff time, which is why I intend to move this forward, because I think it'll, in the long run, create more economies of staff's time than it will create diseconomies. So if you have other concerns about the scope, feel free to ask questions.
This is wonderful. Thank you. I think that all of my questions have been related to the scope of the proceeding. Staff stated that the reason that we were doing this was for administrative ease. So part of that to me is delving into what is the administrative ease. I also am questioning, there's a footnote in here that talks about that there are other proceedings that will continue on the low-income aspects. So my focus is, and again, I stated from the beginning, I think this is the perfect time to be looking at these issues. I'm very supportive of addressing high energy costs and looking at the ways we can ease the burdens on consumers. So one of the things I'm really trying to drill down is the scope of this proceeding as it relates to low income outside of the rate case, and as it relates to the Clean Energy Fund, as it relates to REV, as it relates to all these other things that deal with policies and ratepayer funds. So I'm just trying to understand exactly what we're doing in this proceeding that's different from the others. And then I want to look at what are we doing in those other proceedings that the scope is appropriate or not as it relates to low income, because we're starting this, or potentially starting this, generic proceeding.
I think that Mr. Ansonia laid out the three programs or the three issues that touch upon low-income customers, the protections afforded under statute and regulation, and the second being the efficiency programs. And in that realm, number two, the Clean Energy Fund, REV, and the ESCO dockets have looked at a component of low-income issues. Those are separate and distinct from item 3, which is before you, and that is examining the rate discount programs that have components of both discount on customer bills as well as arrear forgiveness and grants, let's just say, or waivers of reconnection fees. Those are really policy-driven but also there is a revenue requirement associated with them, which is why they find themselves often in rate cases. And it's the latter, that third action, that is the subject of this very focused proceeding. The footnote was intended to be a signal to the communities that this focus in this discrete proceeding does not mean that the focus has been eliminated or shifted in the other cases. And that was important for us to let the stakeholders and the advocates know that in this case, we're looking at the discount programs. We're looking at uniformity as well as ensuring that we're efficiently using ratepayer funds, and we're trying to meet the goal of the programs. But meeting the goal of the program as far as avoiding terminations, of reducing arrearages, doesn't just end with the discount program. It's those other cases, the Clean Energy Fund, it's the efficiency programs. Those all should help meet the goal of the Commission in seeing arrearages be reduced and terminations be decreased, which benefits all of the ratepayers, not to mention the company. So while they're related, we are trying to focus on the discrete question of what is an appropriate, what is the best practice for a discount program, and that's the focus of the matter before you.
When I look at this, I'm trying to understand in the context of REV. And with REV, there is track 1 and track 2. And track 1 deals with some of the policy issues, and track 2 gets into sort of what I would call the more meat and potatoes with the actual rate impacts and how this gets applied. How come this low-income aspect, which is also was subject at the REV technical conference, the representative from UIA stated that they were very interested in low-income aspect in REV and how dealing with some of the regulatory reforms would impact the low-income programs, and utilities are also interested because changing some of the regulatory structure is going to impact a number of their different programs, including low income. So why doesn't that fit there?
I think it's a good question, and I think that is why we're looking at this proceeding. In the context of REV, if I think about this, there's the issue of what creates the cost and the burden on electricity in general, and then secondarily, can people afford it? And the first issue is what REV and Clean Energy Fund are looking at, is really focusing on driving costs down in the system, making the system more efficient, making us looking at other resources that could drive down price, and getting the price to a level of efficiency that we can reflect the fact that we're optimizing technology usage and every type of tool that we can to drive down costs. But there's a certain recognition that I think we would be naive not to make, that even as we do that, and even if we're perfect at it, there may be consumers who continue to be burdened and not be able to afford electricity, and we need to look at programs such as discounts and such as dealing with disconnects to make sure that there's also a consistent application. So I see this as highly complementary, and that we will continue in both REV and the Clean Energy docket to look at how we deliver services around energy efficiency, use of distributed energy, etc. In REV in particular, I know that there is a concern of mine is that REV is about creating markets, and that there may be aspects of this market that really doesn't develop, and we need to take a look at if there are particular entities who people will not want to sell services to because they have credit issues. How do we make certain that we don't create a dislocation such as a divide in energy efficiency between people who are moderate income or low income and people who have higher incomes? These are all issues that I expect REV to deal with. In this docket, though, because REV won't deal with it, is a very specific issue that we deal with in rate cases, which is the level of discounts, how we deal with arrearages, how we deal with disconnects. I think that I understand that there's always a concern about starting a new docket, but if we didn't do that, I think we would find ourselves at the end of this year and at the end of REV saying, well, we dealt with 70% of the issue, we have 30% we have left to deal with. We might as well deal with it now. I think it's a good year because we are looking at multiple rate cases. And again, I'm looking at this from the perspective is that rather than the commission just receiving what the parties agreed to as the right accommodation, we really ought to be showing some leadership in this area and identifying what we would like the policy to be. And that's why you have generic proceedings. So, Commissioner Berman, we have other things on our docket.
I understand,
and
but
I would like to move to a vote.
Thank you. Before you do, though, I think this is a significant issue, and it's a significant next step. So I do want to drill down a little bit on this, because I do want to fully understand, because when I'm listening to the answers, it's helping me conceptualize exactly what we're going to do, which I think is what people are also looking for, which is some guidance. And this is part of building that record so that people can understand what the expectations are from the commissioners in moving forward, rather than just voting on something that doesn't give any context to it. I think it is helpful before we do that to look to this discussion, and other commissioners can feel free. I don't want to hog the mic myself, but other commissioners can feel free to weigh in on their expectations as well. When I'm looking at this, I am very concerned. I very much want to address, and I applaud Chairman Ziebelman's leadership on trying to tackle different issues, and the REV proceeding is a great one to look at doing that. And I do think it's very important, and I'm all in going and doing a drill down on issues, not just low income, but on other issues. So part of what I want to be able to do is to understand the time frame and also how this is all going to be rolled out. So as we're doing this, there seems to be an indication that we will be making some, or potentially making some recommendations sooner rather than later, because there will be rate cases coming in for the majority of the utilities in 2015. But then how does that interrelate with the REV proceeding as well? So that, for example, is there going to be some complementary input from relevant stakeholders in the REV process, so that it's not in a silo that these decisions are being made? Because part of it is, for me, is to making sure that we're working together in a cohesive and comprehensive way, so that taking whatever drill down is being done and work product is being done on one proceeding is not now having to be duplicated or not utilized in the fashion, and looking at somehow having seamlessness between them, so that people don't have to then say, well, I wasn't in that proceeding, so I have no idea what any of this means. Or they forgot about this because this is a huge thing that's going on. There's this wonderful potential demonstration project on low income and energy efficiency. So I'm just trying to figure out how they fit together.
So, go ahead, Marty.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Berman, I think Chair Ziebelman expressed this very well in my view, that in the REV proceeding, we're looking at potential for new technologies and new products and services that will drive down the cost of energy for everyone, including low-income households. In the energy efficiency realm, which energy efficiency programs are essentially designed to do the same thing, to make the cost of heating and lighting our homes less expensive than they might otherwise be. There would still be a substantial portion of the utility customer base that will find those bills to be unaffordable, and they will need additional financial assistance. So even if the REV efforts are wildly successful, even beyond what we expect or hope for, there will still be customers who can't afford their bills and will need financial assistance. Those are the programs that we're looking at here.
Let me just add to this. I mean, let's be realistic too. We're beginning REV. We're going to be making investments. We're going to be changing the industry, but it's not going to happen overnight. And so, in the meantime, we need to make sure that in setting the rates and what we charge people, we're doing the right thing. And so it's essential, again, that we look at the arrearages and the trends that we're seeing and making sure that we're being effective in these programs. And at the same time, look at the root causes, and if those root causes are because we are not getting the best value for the energy dollar, we look for ways to drive that down, and that's what REV and the Clean Energy Program are about, but it is a timing issue. Commissioner Berman, I am going to take a vote.
Thank you. And I'll my vote will be split, so I'll have to explain my vote.
Okay.
Can I say one more
Yes,
thing?
Commissioner Eckenberg.
I'd just like to say, again, my favorite word over these past many years has been flexibility. And we have a unique situation at this commission where we have two other commissioners who have served as chair. And knowing that, I have full confidence when the chair makes a decision to bring something forward that it should be respected. It can be questioned, and that gives you time during the process of a proceeding to get involved and to look at areas that are important to you and to bring that to the attention of the chair to make sure that in the end, when the matter comes before us to vote, that all your concerns are really addressed. So I feel, again, flexibility, addressing something that's been important to the state of New York as far as making sure our low-income people are being taken care of, and we're doing it in the best efficient way. We all have a concern to make sure that the monies that are spent wisely and efficiently. And I think that, again, we're sharpening the pencil again, and we're going back to look at this to make sure that we're doing it right and that there is a standardization that does make it easy for those consumer advocates who are very important to us, who are, again, the boots on the ground that let us know what are the problems and how can they also better serve those people who are in need. So I'm going to vote in favor of this.
Commissioner Sayre, Commissioner Brown, anything?
I can promise that I'm less than a minute.
Okay.
I think what we have I think what we have in front of us is relatively simple. It's an accident of history as a result of multiple separate rate cases, rather than careful analysis that the programs differ as much as they do from utility to utility. There may be good reasons for those differences, demographics, specific services that are taken by low-income customers, or rate levels, but we need to make careful and conscious decisions and choices whether the plans should keep differing. At the same time, we need to look, and we've already started to look, at other states that have tried different plans and see if there are some best practices that we can adopt. Those are two fairly simple things that I think this proceeding is designed to accomplish. That's what I look for it to accomplish, and I will be voting in favor of it.
Commissioner Brown.
You know, it's the nature of what we do here that we have many multifaceted cases going at the same time. It will always be true. We really have to deal with them somewhat in a matrix. Never smoothly can you say, well, this issue is going to be dealt in this proceeding at this time, and it will not affect any other proceeding. Everything affects each other. That's the job, not an enviable one at times, of the chair and the staff to try to put these pieces together and make sure that we don't differ, we don't treat things inconsistently between cases. A very good vehicle to try to focus that tends to be these generic proceedings which take a hard look at a specific issue. We will not decide in this case every low-income case, every low-income decision, every low-income input in this case. It's got to happen in a variety of places. But if we can do more consistency, examine best practices, and try to maximize what we get out of these programs, it'll be well worth the effort. So I have many questions that Commissioner Berman has at this point. What's this proceeding going to do? How's it going to do it? But really, I think you have to get it going and look at the interrelationship of this with REV. Look at the interrelationship of this with energy efficiency programs. Look at the interrelationship between this and rate cases that'll be coming our way. And good questions, but we don't need all the answers today to start the proceedings. So I support the starting so that we can get the answers.
Thank you.
Well, do you want me to answer before I vote? Because I have to explain my vote, so I am comfortable either way.
Let's take the vote, and then you can explain it. So, all those in favor of the recommendation to institute a proceeding and solicit comments concerning energy affordability programs for low-income individuals as described, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I am very much in support of looking at issues and how to ease administrative and regulatory burdens. I'm very much in support of addressing energy affordability, not only for the low income, but for the businesses and other community members that are facing high energy costs. I understand that not every proceeding is going to address every issue. I do look holistically at what we are doing, and I have consistently asked both internally and externally, where are we going? Where have we been? What's the benefit? How can we improve things? How can we make things better? I'm very much respectful. I'm very much in agreement with the chair that it is very important that we look carefully at the issues, especially as costs to the ratepayers, and helping to make sure that people do not go without heat and that they have the proper energy that they need. So when I look at this, I am concerned that we have started too many generic proceedings, too many small proceedings, too many big proceedings. And I'm trying to make sure that we all keep in mind how everything fits together. So I don't ask these questions in a public forum to be disrespectful. I don't ask these questions in a public forum to seem to be indicating that I am not in agreement. What I do feel comfortable with is that in my role as a commissioner, I must make sure that I understand exactly what we're doing, and I must, before I vote, make sure that I have carefully weighed all of the issues, and that when I cast my vote, I don't expect the other commissioners to always agree with me. I'm comfortable if they don't. Frankly, I'm good with mixing it up and making sure we get the best product. I'm also comfortable if people say, you're full of it, and tell me why I'm wrong, because I want to understand. I want to make sure that we do what's right. And I can only do that if I drill down. Now, some people may think that that means that I'm long-winded. Yes, I am long-winded. Some people may think that that means that I'm looking to be difficult. No, I am difficult, but I'm not looking to be difficult. I'm looking to make sure that we all understand what it is that we have on our plate and how we're going to achieve it. I am lucky enough not to be the chair who has to deal with the headaches of having to figure out how to take all of these resources, the limited that we do, and to make sure that we do the work product that we need. However, as a commissioner, I am concerned with the amount of finite resources that we have internally and looking to make sure that we are taking on what we can achieve and that we do have closure on those proceedings and that the goals that we set can be done in a timely but in a very substantial way that we actually give the good that we need to New York. So when I look at this, I am dissenting in that I don't think that this is necessary at this time for a generic proceeding. However, what I would say is, and there's also I have concurrence on some things, what I would say is it's because we have not fully done our homework. We have not done an evaluation of the current low-income programs. We have not done a specific drill down and looking at what are the number of customers. Now, there were statistics given, but those were not the be-all and end-all. There's many, many things that we need to factor in. And so part of this is also laying the groundwork for what I do hope before we go and have the collaborative with the stakeholders. We can't just say, tell us what you think, if we have not done our own homework on the current programs that we have agreed in rate cases are acceptable, or better than acceptable. We need to do an evaluation of the monies that we have expended. Who has it been given to? In what service territories? How many customers are out there? When we talk about the increase in arrears, is that just for low-income customers? I don't think so. When we talk about some of these things, it really needs to be a drill down and to understand what it is and to look at the pros and cons. And again, I go back to that 2006 report that was started where they were looking at on a national level the pros and cons, statewide, some standardization, looking at doing it in a rate case. And so for me, one of the things is I know in the Con Ed collaborative, in the Con Ed rate case, instead of saying let's start a generic proceeding on storm hardening resiliency, they said let's do a takeaway. Let's have a working group and have a collaborative looking at these issues. They did it. They came back to the rate case. Everybody was in agreement. Everybody worked with it. And I think it came up with a very good structure. And then the next step was taking that as an example and looking at how to apply it, and it's still going on, how to apply it in other utilities. But there was a framework. So it wasn't just tell us what you think. It was a real working group. It was a real drill down, not in a silo, not just with a few meetings with some people, but really out there in the public for everybody to be involved in and to actually get the bang for the buck. So I dissent in this generic proceeding, but I concur if we're going to do it, then we have to be all in. Unless I can convince everyone else to say no to the generic proceeding, which I don't think is possible, I would say I concur, but I would, from the perspective that, assuming this goes forward, that there really is a need to undertake a real review of ratepayer funds of low-income energy programs. And we need to look at it to furnish guidance on our regulatory framework needed to support these programs and to see if there's any effective standardized practices with respect to the program design and implementation, and to make sure that we have the resources that we need, but that others have it. We can't ask everybody to do everything if we're not able to look carefully and see how we can do this. So that's sort of my focus here is it's going to be a lot of work. I am all in doing that. But I want to make sure that this is not just a starting it and it's really not going to be done in a comprehensive way. So I'm comfortable. I would say thank you for the courtesy extended to me in talking more than I think people wanted to listen to. But I appreciate the opportunity, and I do thank all of my fellow commissioners and the staff.
So we record this as a 4-1 vote with a concurrence. Not sure how to do that, but I'm sure people will figure it out. But let me just say this, just for the record. I don't think that anyone ever intended to have this as a proceeding with a limited number of constituents. The idea here was to actually have a focused drill down of all the relevant parties looking at a specific set of issues outside of a rate case context, with the idea of bringing it back to the Commission with a full record so that the Commission, to the extent it elects to do so, can provide guidance that would be, in the end, helpful in future rate cases. So to any sense that this wasn't going to be a full-on look, I want to disabuse everybody of that, but I don't think any of the other commissioners thought that would be the case, since it's not the practice of this Commission to do it that way. So thank you, and let's move on to the next item. Second item is 301, so talking about lessons learned. Mr. Van Ryn, you did such a great job before the holiday explaining a very complex set of issues that we decided to bring you back for an encore.
Well, the same ones are back again. Good morning, everyone. At its last session, the Commission addressed interpretations of net metering law and policy where uncertainties had existed. Including among the uncertainties resolved were means for determining compliance with the 2 megawatt limit on the size of a net metered facility under Public Service Law Section 66-J. The Commission also addressed a rate design in effect at remote net metering locations. Under that rate design, remote net metered customers have been permitted to convert the volumetric charges at non-demand locations into monetary credits. In comparison, a non-demand customer installing net metering on site, a non-demand meter installing net metering on site instead of at a remote site can accumulate only volumetric credits and cannot convert to monetary credits. In addition, customers net metering on site at an existing demand meter are credited at comparatively lower volumetric rates because of the demand charges. The result is uneconomic arbitrage as customers pursue remote net metering where they can convert comparatively large volumetric credits into monetary credits instead of on-site net metering where they can't convert or are credited at lower volumetric rates. As a result, electric utilities were directed to file tariffs that substitute volumetric crediting for monetary crediting at non-demand remote net metered locations. This will place remote and on-site locations on an equal footing and prevent the uneconomic arbitrage. The Commission also decided, however, that it would grandfather developers that have pursued installation of renewable facilities in good faith from the resolution of these legal and policy issues. Grandfathering avoids disruption of the state's goals for encouraging renewable energy. As a result, participants in NYSERDA and New York City competitive renewable solicitations were not required to comply with the interpretations for implementing the 2 megawatt requirement as long as they had proceeded with the development of their facilities in good faith. And developers were also grandfathered from the substitution of monetary credits for volumetric rates. And that grandfathering has raised a considerable number of issues among stakeholders. All right, the grandfathering for those stakeholders was extended to participants in the NYSERDA and New York City renewable solicitations, to existing remote net metered facilities, and to customers that had entered into interconnection agreements for remote net metering that had been queued by the utilities as of December 11, 2014. And that date was selected because it was the date of the Commission's session. In conversations with renewable stakeholders following the issuance of the Commission's order, staff ascertained that further elaboration on the grandfathering provisions would assist in avoiding the disruption of renewable project proposals, and that the clarifications could be made within the framework of the existing order. Therefore, staff recommends that the Commission find grandfathering because of successful participation in the NYSERDA or New York City solicitations includes grandfathering for all actions permitted by a solicitation, that grandfathering because of status in a utility interconnection queue be determined upon the time a preliminary interconnection application was submitted to the utility, and that the operational separation required for qualification as a 2 megawatt project is that the project is run independently. Some renewable stakeholders were concerned that to retain grandfathering, they would be denied the flexibility that was otherwise accorded to them in the NYSERDA and New York City solicitations. The order should be clarified to provide that the policies and practices that NYSERDA and New York City have established for their solicitations will be respected, and that participants in those solicitations will retain grandfathering so long as they follow those policies and practices. Stakeholders also inquired into the method that would be used to establish that a position in a utility queue had been obtained as of the December 11, 2014 cutoff date. The prior order can be clarified to establish that a developer must have submitted a preliminary interconnection application to the utility as of that date to be in the queue. As to the requirements established for compliance with the 2 megawatt statutory provision, stakeholders questioned how they could show that they could meet the requirement that a project be operationally separate. It should be clarified that that showing can be made by demonstrating that the project can start up, shut down, and run independently from any other project. In addition, stakeholders have raised the grandfathering of participants in another NYSERDA solicitation, known as PON 2112, in addition to the competitive solicitations already grandfathered. Since, unlike those other solicitations, PON 2112 is not a competitive solicitation because it provides for ongoing cash incentives supporting installation of solar PV systems of 25 kilowatts or less for residential customers and 200 kilowatts or less for non-residential customers. So therefore, it raises issues that were not really addressed in the original order. However, grandfathering of the participants in PON 2112 could be considered in these proceedings subsequent to this clarification, and it should also be noted that the participants in that PON can qualify for grandfathering through the utility queuing process as well. Petitions for rehearing of the Commission's prior order are due on December 14th, 2015. And notice under the State Administrative Procedure Act has been set up so the Commission can act quickly on any petitions that are received to the extent necessary to promote achievement of the state's renewable goals. I'm ready to answer any questions.
Just one clarification.
Yeah.
Petitions for rehearing are due January?
January. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, you do have to watch the dates here. They pile on top of each other. So, yeah, the grandfathering date is December 11, 2014. Petitions for rehearing are due December 14, 2015. January 15, January.
You just like
January
Christmas
14,
so much you
2015.
want it to be Christmas again. But we all know this is going to be a nightmarish year, and we want it over really fast. So, thank you,
Yeah.
Mr. Van Ryn. So basically, just to be clear, I mean, the order for clarification is to address a number of the concerns that people had, that they were not clear what we meant by the grandfathering and what do we mean by a separate 2 megawatt, and it is intended to provide that level of clarification. Well aware that we have one petition for rehearing already has been filed with the Commission, and so they will be taken up in due course, but this is really to make sure that to the extent that people would feel compelled to ask for reconsideration only because of a misunderstanding of what we meant when we say a separate 2 megawatt project or what we would grandfather, that we could address those, and so that settled expectations would not be disrupted. And I appreciate that the order intends to do that. So with that, I would, I'm going to, I guess we would vote to amend it. So thank you. Any other further questions or comments on this?
Yes. My only comment is that I do see in the most recent petition that was filed yesterday by Couch White on behalf of Sun Edison, that it stated in its petition that this error of fact that they're referring to in here, it's not important substantively right now, could have been avoided if the Commission had established procedures that invited comments on the proposed change, and then it goes on to go into it. So I do see, we are going to be, it seems like, looking at other potential petitions for rehearing. And so from my perspective, I think that note in that petition does make me question is, here we are dealing with one aspect. Obviously, we're not dealing with the whole kitchen sink, and I understand there's a timing issue and you want to get out the clarification, but you're still going to then have to clarify or fix it or change. And so I'm just, noting that I think we should be mindful that when we do things, that we do ask, have we sort of socialized this in a public way before we go down that road and then have to deal with what I would call cleanup issues. So it's, it doesn't really require anything unless you want. That's fine. I see you're chomping at the bit to say something, Kim. So I just really do want to make sure that we are looking and saying, hey, have we gotten, everybody involved that may be able to help us in what we're doing. So thank you.
Well, I think that the issue on rehearings will be taken care of, and I'm sure there will be dialogue among staff and the petitioners on all of these things, so that if we are going to do rehearings, we make sure that we've addressed all the issues and understand, where in fact there may be ambiguity, so we clarify them up front. So that is sort of the normal route. I think that this was an exceedingly complex set of issues that we were dealing with, and so I think that the clarification will make it clear of what the Commission's intent would be. But that's one of the reasons I think, frankly, generic proceedings are helpful, is that it allows us to get that clarity up front. But with that, let me take a vote then on this item, unless there are any other comments. Okay, for a second,
Can I ask, I do have a question. You talked about the time frame. Is there a, time is of the essence, I think, for the developers, and obviously, there seems to be a concern with communication, and, is there, we're, in a sense, fast-tracking this today rather than waiting because of that, but what about the ones who are going to need some more input in what we're doing sooner rather than later? The clock is ticking.
So I think one of the reasons why staff recommended quick action for clarification is because there's pending projects out there in the queue, and folks need to know how to deal with those and how to treat those, both from a utility, from NYSERDA, from a developer perspective. So clarification was brought pretty quickly back to the Commission because of that need, also because of our observation that without the clarification we would see declaratory rulings, petitions for clarification, and we were trying to actually be proactive with the Commission, not waiting for those filings to come in. Second, Len probably gets called more than anybody in the building on a daily basis from developers of net metered facilities, and they ask a multitude of questions, both Len and Tina Palmero, who have really worked this issue to the benefit, I think, of the department and avoiding everybody else having to deal with it. But they do entertain a discussion, and we have reached out and have been working with NYSERDA. It's part of what informed the clarification that you see before you for action. And we're going to have to do that. Some may need more definitive response from the Commission, and that we will see with petitions for rehearing. And we, took the proactive step when we were notified of the issue on grandfathering of going out with a SAPA before we even got the first petition for rehearing. So in every sense of the word for this case, we have been incredibly proactive in recognizing the needs of the marketplace. And so we will be back to you in pretty quick order because of our proactive nature in getting the SAPA out and try to resolve these issues for everybody so they know how to move forward.
But to be clear, the clarification isn't a modification of our original decision. It's just to make sure our original decision is clear. So, and the petitions for reconsideration may involve petitions to ask us to modify the decision, in which case we would have to make a determination as to whether we want to change our minds. So, and we're, certainly we'll consider both. Any other further comments? Okay, then let me take a vote then. All those in favor of the recommendations to clarify the order raising net metering minimum caps and requiring tariff revisions, other findings, and establishing further procedures, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
I am abstaining based on my prior history and abstaining in this order. And I do note that for the record, I am interested in the process and making sure that we make sure that the people on the ground are involved in looking at this, and especially if there are time-sensitive issues for developers. Thank you.
I'm going to, so 4 in favor and 1 abstention. We will then proceed, and the vote is, the recommendation is adopted. So let's now move to the consent agenda. And I note that Commissioner Sayre is recusing himself from item number 562 on the consent agenda. And are there any comments or questions from the Commission on the consent agenda items?
On item 364,
Commissioner Berman, let me just check and see.
Sure.
Anyone else? No. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. On item 364, which is a recommendation that the Commission should deny the petition of GP Renewable and Trading for voluntary SBC RPS opt-in mechanism for all New York Power Authority municipal customers, and the recommendation is to deny the petition. My comment here is that I am going to concur if it's a denial without prejudice. I do believe that there are many issues in going forward. I understand that we need some consistency and transition to the Clean Energy Fund and the discussions on that. And obviously I've raised in the past looking at a drill down on the funding streams and all of those issues with that. And I'm very comfortable, but I don't want this to be, now we cannot revisit these issues and looking at opt-in or opt-out of these programs and, how can we best help customers. I think these are the issues that people should feel comfortable raising, down the line. So, thank you.
Council, do you want to comment?
So I just want to clarify the position you're taking, Commissioner. Concurrence with that note on the record of what you anticipate seeing in the future, the without prejudice, versus I will only concur if you change the order that is before you. And I just want to make sure for purposes of the voting record,
Right.
we have that correct.
Correct.
Is
It's
it the former
first.
or it's the first?
Yes.
Okay. So it's
Do you want to restate it?
No. Well, I'll state it and you can confirm. How's that?
Then I may disagree with you.
It's a concurrence with the decision and a notation that you expect without prejudice these issues be allowed to be raised in subsequent proceedings such as the
Yes.
Clean Energy Fund.
Those issues, as well as anyone that wants to bring anything to the table that may be helpful in how we deal with funding streams, I'm all for. So,
Council, let me just get a clarification here, because for the record, as a matter of law, no commission order can bind any future commission order. So, frankly, there is no decision we make that is with prejudice. And so, just to be clear, it is our expectation in both the Clean Energy Fund as well as REV and everything else that we're exploring all these issues, including the multiple interveners petition, and is also looking for a form of opt-in or opt-out. So, Commissioner Berman, to your point, I agree that these issues will remain and should be looked at on a broad policy basis of how we address energy efficiency in the future, including the particular topic of this petition of whether NYPA customers should or should not be part of a pool and how they would participate. So I think.
but there is a distinction.
Well,
though.
I'm just so it's clear, at least my vote is that when I'm voting on this petition, I'm voting specifically on this petition because I think the issue of whether NYPA customers should be able to participate in the energy efficiency programs is a big policy issue that has ramifications that we need to consider in a broader policy decision like REV or the Clean Energy Fund, where we are considering, and the multiple intervener petition, where we're considering these on a broad scale. That to try to do it on the basis of one petition for one vendor could put us in an awkward outcome, and I think it requires deliberation, and this proceeding just doesn't give us that opportunity. That's why we have the EAPS. We're looking at that, and we're looking at these other proceedings. So, at least for me, and I'm speaking, I think, now on behalf of the Commission as a group, this is not necessarily a sort of a sense that we're not going to look at this issue. It's that we are not going to decide this particular issue in this docket.
And I understand that there is a distinction between a denial of a petition and a denial without prejudice. Even if you deny something or grant something, you can always, obviously that's part of the difficulty with regulatory uncertainty, the Commission can always revisit an issue and change its policy or position. I want to make clear that I'm not deciding it on the basis of necessarily the policy of whether someone opts in or opts out. I'm saying that I'm very open to looking at this, and I do agree that these issues should be looked at down the road. And so in a sense, I'm really agreeing with the parties that said this should be decided later in the right forum. So I am comfortable denying without prejudice so that these issues are not having to be raised again, and then they say, well, we're asked and answered, but we'll relook at it. I'm saying they should be moved into that bucket. And then any and all issues relating to opt-in and opt-out and how it may benefit. I mean, you know, NYPA customers opting in may actually be beneficial for the ones that don't have the ability at this time to opt out. So I'm comfortable with all of those. So I understand that we're denying, but I'm not denying without prejudice, is my position.
Council, should we record that as a no vote or a yes vote? Because I do not want to suggest that any of us want to preclude these issues.
It's a concurrence on that I'm denying without prejudice, and my comments at session speak for themselves.
Commissioner Berman, let me ask council because about what her opinion is on how we should record this.
Okay, so the Commissioner Berman is concurring in the decision of the commission to deny the petition. But in concurrence, she is articulating that she believes the other dockets, such as CEF, should take on this and other issues associated with opt-in and opt-out. So for purposes of a vote, it's a 5-1 recording.
Thank you. 4-1.
It's four yeses and one concurrence. Technically, you're right on the 5-1, but you're counting my vote twice, which I'm all good with.
Are we back in Chicago? Okay. Any other comments on the consent agenda? Okay. Let's move to a vote. All those in favor of the consent agenda, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Okay, for the record, Max, you did not do your job. Secretary Burgess, is there anything further to come before us today?
There's nothing further for today. The next commission scheduled is February 5th at 10:30 in Albany.
Great, thank you.